Yellow and Red makes by Digits 27, Chapter 14. Despite many of the ninja teams immediately heading into the trees as soon as the gates opened, the Sand Trio stayed on the ground. While trees offered a height advantage and the ability to travel faster, they were more in their element closer to the ground, or at least Gaara was. Tayuya was the same in both environments, as was Naruto. Despite his surprising proficiency in tree running, the dimmer conditions didn't affect them either, thanks to Naruto's and Gaara's more sensitive eyes and Tayuya's practice with getting around the dark. It also limited their opponents. The Konoha shinobi would no doubt stick to the trees, as it was their natural environment. Naruto had no idea about the sound's preferences, but he at least knew that the grass ninja would no doubt stick to the ground level with them. Right now he was tracking the scent of wet grass that was steadily heading closer to them. At the same time, he was keeping tabs on all of the shinobi in the vicinity. Gaara protected them from the various dangerous fauna that were stupid or brave enough to attack them. After a while, though, they seemed to get the idea that coming near the human child with the strange container was a bad idea. Contrary to many ninja ideals of getting in and out quickly, the three were taking it relatively slow, being careful to not give away their own position. They only had to speed up when he smelt the grass ninja moving closer to another group of shinobi, most likely Leaf. He smirked. This was perfect. That the two teams would fight it out and they could merely pick off the winners. Weakened as they would be, it was hardly the most honorable or courageous thing to do, but they were ninja. That wasn't part of their job. When you had an advantage, you took it. Most would be stupid not to, and those were the ninja that got killed. He felt the two groups draw closer. From the way they moved, Naruto could tell the Konoha team were completely unprepared for the attack. Naruto frowned as he felt two of the scents from the grass ninja take off, leaving only one still heading towards the group. This was strange. Naruto thought they must be forming some kind of plan, but the other two kept on moving further into the forest. He quickly informed his teammates of the strange occurrence, and they were just as confused as he was. He left Tayuya to mull it over, being the tactician of the group, while they closed in on the groups. Now very curious to see what was going on. What they saw surprised them, to say the least. A single female grass nin standing high up in the trees, facing the three Konoha nin. She seemed to just be glaring at them, and they were frozen in fear. Naruto narrowed his eyes, trying to see just what was going on. The Leaf team was comprised of the same genin they had observed in Wave Country, the Uchiha, the pink-haired girl, and the one with black glasses and the long, high-collared gray coat. The glasses wearing boy was unconscious, barely propped up by the trembling girl, as her eyes were firmly fixed on that of the grass ninjas. Suddenly, Naruto caught another scent on the air, and his eyes narrowed into a hateful glare from the grass ninja. No matter how well it was hidden beneath the genjutsus and other means, he could still smell Orochimaru's vile stench. He only seemed to have noticed the new arrivals now, looking down at them with a vicious smile and almost amused eyes. "Ah, so it's the boy with the impressive nose." He looked across at Gaara, who was still uninformed of just who this was, and the fatherless one. His lips curled up into an ugly smile as he licked his lips with an abnormal long tongue. Gaara narrowed his eyes, wondering who was defiant enough to call him that, or how they even knew. Naruto tried to stay calm, but he was finding that extremely difficult with the murderer of his friend's father so close. "Orochimaru." It was a growl more than anything else, as he fought to stop himself just blindly jumping at the man. This was one of Konoha's most dangerous missing ninja, and there was no way Naruto could take him on by himself. Of course, Gaara wasn't nearly as able to control himself. He had just learned that his father's killer was standing across from him, within the range of his sand. It reacted immediately. The entire gourd broke apart, revealing the entirety of Gaara's sand, all of which immediately lashed out in Orochimaru's direction. The snake Sanin jumped out of the way with time to spare, but watched in quiet intrigue as the whip of sand leveled the same area of forestry behind where he had stood. It didn't stop there, though. As soon as Gaara noticed the missing nin's movement, he redirected some of the sand. This time it came much closer, Orochimaru having to physically exert himself to bend his grotesquely lithe body underneath the practical wall of sand. Gaara's eyes were burning, and his mouth was pulled up into a snarl that matched Tayuya's was on her worst days. As his sand did its work, he slowly walked across the clearing, eyes never leaving Orochimaru's form as he danced about in the trees. Each blow was more vicious and stronger than its predecessor, and soon there were no trees left for the pale-skinned man to jump to. He was tired of playing around anyway. When the next sand whip came to him, he didn't even bother to move. All Naruto saw was a glint of steel before the sand overwhelmed him. Suddenly, the stream parted, curving around the murderer. Naruto saw why. Emerging from the man's mouth was a large sword that actually split the sand straight down the middle. Unfortunately, Gaara couldn't see this from his position. All he did was keep the barrage hammering in on the man. He wasn't planning on letting him go now that he finally had him. Then, all at once, Orochimaru vanished, appearing moments later behind Gaara, with his sword poised to strike through the boy's heart. His sand was only just fast enough to intercept the strike before it would have pierced his heart. It only slowed the blade, but that was enough time for more of Gaara's defenses to congregate at the point's position and reinforce the shield that had sprung up. Orochimaru jumped back before a large spike emerged from the wall, right where the snake man's head would have been. Naruto had been standing still, shocked by the way the raw ferocity Gaara displayed, leveled the clearing and attacking his father's killer. He finally saw his opportunity to attack while the man was focused on his friend, but as soon as he made a move, a purple and white blur appeared in front of him, hand on his chest. Naruto was about to slug the guy before he saw the leaf headband and held his fist back on the inch from his back an inch from his face. "Don't get involved. This is my fight. He attacked me." Naruto just looked at him, annoyed and dumbfounded, noticing the red eyes and the now true Uchiha possessed, as well as the single Tomoe of one eye and the double in the other. "What the hell are you talking about? Don't you know who that?" He jumped back as another one of Gaara's sand whips, which were looking more and more like arms as the seconds trickled by, smacked through what was left of the tree above them. He backslid backwards, just in time for the trunk to smash into the ground where he stood. He was about to make another move to help his friend when he saw the Uchiha leap out from cover and engage Orochimaru. Naruto couldn't help but watch the rather impressive display of taijutsu from the Genin. He definitely hadn't been that good when they observed him in wave. Even though Orochimaru dodged every single blow that came his way, they still came hard and fast. Eventually, the snake sounding either got bored or he was actually feeling hard pressed. Naruto thought the former more likely, and when he backhanded Sasuke and sent him flying across the clearing to crash painfully into a tree trunk, he was obviously about to go and finish the job or whatever it was he planned when he saw something out of the corner of his eye. He dodged just as Naruto's first fist came sailing over his torso. Naruto just followed his momentum, moving over Orochimaru and attempting a strong kick to the man's side. He simply grabbed Naruto's foot out of the air and threw him with strength unexpected for a man of his build. Naruto twisted in the air, landing feet first against the trunk he had been thrown at, only to coil up tightly and pounce right back. Orochimaru once again avoided the punch, noticing the hand was played as if the Genin was trying to slap him. He soon understood why when 4 rips appeared across his face. Naruto was under a hinge, but that didn't mean his claws weren't still there. He looked up, quite pleased that he had landed a blow, only to see a most horrific sight. Orochimaru stood there, his mouth curled up into that same bone-chilling smile. Only half his face was hanging off in tatters. Below it was merely another face. It revealed the faint purple tattoos on the sides of his nose and his pallid, sickly skin. Naruto wasn't sure whether or not to be disgusted or intrigued. He decided on the former as he continued to stare at the grotesque sight. "Most impressive, Naruto. It has been a while since anyone came close to hurting me like this. It really is a shame about your resident. Otherwise, I believe you might make the absolute perfect candidate for just what I have planned." His mouth somehow grew even more evil, and his eyes bored into Naruto's own, freezing him in place with the intent behind him. As it is, I have plans for young Sasuke here, so if you don't mind." With that, the snake Sanin broke his gaze with Naruto, only for the young boy to freeze again as Orochimaru's neck elongated in an impossible manner. The newly lengthened appendage shot across the clearing, fang-like teeth bared and aimed directly at Sasuke's neck. The Sanin closed his eyes and bit down into the soft flesh, working the necessary jutsu in his mind as slowly The three-pronged seal coalesced on soft skin. He pulled back to admire his handiwork, only to snarl in barely concealed rage as he saw the flash of red hair. Tayuya's eyes were open wide in shock, unblinking and unfocused as she just stood there for a moment. She had a kunai raised out in front of herself, but it harmlessly clattered to the ground before she fell forward out of the tree. That was certainly enough to get Naruto moving as he raced across the clearing in a split second, catching Tayuya in both of his arms. He worriedly looked over her, noticing the bite mark that still bled as well as the tattooed-like stripe Tomo mark just behind it. Tayuya was shaking in his arms, violently convulsing with her eyes screwed up in agony, even though she was unconscious. Naruto just stared down at her helplessly, not even having the first clue on how to help his friend. He clutched her helplessly, not even having the first clue on how to. He clutched her a bit closer to his chest and turned to stare at the man who had done this with murder flames flaming in his eyes. Orochimaru just seemed amused once again, if not slightly annoyed. "What did you do?" Orochimaru shrugged nonchalantly, rolling his eyes in exasperation. "Really now, is that the thanks I get?" His smirk returned. "If she survives, think of it as a gift, the best she has ever received." His grin hid his irritation at the whole situation. He only had enough chakra to place one curse mark every 2 days, so it meant that Sasuke would have to wait. Orochimaru was patient, however. He still had time, and there would be other opportunities. Even though he was in deep thought, he still dodged the fist of sand aimed his way. Gaara had caught his bearings enough to renew his attack on the evil man before them, having seen what he did to Tayuya. For his part, Orochimaru was finished here. He could not mark Sasuke yet, and there was no sense just standing around toying with a bunch of snot-nosed genin. He took off, and Gaara was about to run after him when he heard Naruto's desperate plea of help. His gaze only flickered once before the retreating Sannin, and his friend clutched his other friend to his chest before running over to offer what help he could. What he saw was not good. Tayuya was pale, unnaturally so, and she was sporadically convulsing. Her eyes. What he saw was not good. Tayuya was pale, unnaturally so, and she was sporadically convulsing. Her eyes were screwed shut, as if any light might blind her indefinitely, and her hands were clenched into fists, so tight she drew blood. Gaara looked down on her as helplessly as Naruto had, not knowing at all how he could possibly help her. "We need to get her to the tower." Naruto stared blankly at him before the words set in and a determined mask slipped over his features. He gently laid the struggling girl down and immediately sprinted over to where Sasuke was still unconscious. Propped up in the crater he had made impacting on the trunk, he searched through the boy's pockets but growled in frustration when he couldn't find his scroll. He turned angrily on the last conscious member of the Konoha team, the pink-haired Kunoichi, who had simply stared in awe and fear at the entire encounter. "Where is your scroll?" The trembling girl turned to him, looking at him with slightly unfocused eyes, so Naruto grabbed her shoulders and shook her a little until she snapped out of it. "Your scroll! Where is it?" He ate it. He let go of her shoulders and grunted in frustration. His mouth curled into an irritated snarl as he rushed back to his other teammates. Tayuya was still in trouble, so he quickly picked her up and slung her over his shoulder. He didn't like to treat her this way, but he had no choice. He didn't know how much time he had. Gaara saw him pick the girl up and shoot off into the trees, close on his heels, but due to Naruto's unfettered speed, he was actually falling behind. Naruto was just following his nose. Right now he didn't care who it was. Konoha nin, Sound nin, hell, even Tamari's team. If they had an earth scroll, then they were fair game. He sped towards the nearest scent, completely uncaring of who saw, heard, or detected them. Just wanting to get there, he broke out of the trees to see some rather surprised leaf shinobi. It was the older ones that included the bespectacled, white-haired one. He used their momentary surprise to lightly set Tayuya down and giving her one last worried look before turning around to stare down the three men. They didn't know what to make of an amazingly fast genin popping out of the tree right on top of them without any way of signifying where he was from. All they saw was the 9 engravings on his forehead protector, wondering briefly what that meant as they dropped into their respective fighting stances. They didn't have to wait long to learn why, when vicious orange chakra bubbled around Naruto's flesh, encircling him and cocooning him in a shroud of the boiling substance. Almost lazily, a large tail bubbled out of the shroud as two flickering carrying ears grew in a similar manner around his head. Naruto had been hunched over, stared at the ground through the whole process, but when he looked up, he caused all three of the ninjas to falter slightly. His blue eyes were gone, replaced by the ferocious and unforgiving red ones that looked hungry at them with barely contained rage. His teeth were fangs jutting out from his teeth, enough to be seen when he had it closed. He was on all fours, but now, but the shinobi were back in their stances, preparing themselves for the attack. Unfortunately, nothing could have prepared them from Naruto's uncontained wrath. He was there 1 second before. With barely a flicker, he vanished, instantly appearing behind one of the ninjas with the masks, which, right now, in the heated moment, Naruto couldn't care less as he rounded his body and delivered a kick directly to the man's temple. The chakra-infused blow sent the man careening away from him. What happened to him? Again, Naruto didn't care, but the time the man's teammates looked around, he had already vanished and reappeared behind the other masked one and performed the exact same maneuver, receiving the exact same results. Kabuto didn't even bother to look around as he heard the other kick connect to his teammate's skull. Instead, he instantly diverted chakra to his hand, forming his deadly chakra scalpel. Without even hesitating, he swung around, bringing the makeshift blade up in an arc, hitting Naruto square in the chest. The enraged Jinchuriki staggered back. Even through his protective aura, he felt that blow. One of his lungs had been punctured, and a few arteries near his heart were severed. He dropped to one knee, fist down on the ground. He already felt the damage being healed, but Kabuto wasn't going to give him the time. He brought the scalpel back up to slice the boy's head clean from his shoulders, certain he wouldn't be able to regenerate that. His mouth curled into a smile, eerily similar to that of his master's, as the glowing green hand descended on unprotected flesh. It would have worked had a shield of sand not appeared between his hand and the Jinchuriki. He turned to face the newcomer, his worst mistake to date. As Naruto had finished recovering, his hand shot out through the sand, which parted at his touch, only to wrap around the white-haired traitor's neck. Kabuto could feel the claws draw blood where they met his skin and winced from the pain. He was already diverting chakra in order to repair the wounds and break down the carbon dioxide in his lungs back into oxygen. Naruto just tightened his grip on the man's neck. His chakra cloak was beginning to recede, and he was thinking more clearly now. He let go when the man's eyes rolled back and his entire body went limp. He didn't even shoot a glance at Gaara as he approached the scene. Instead, routing through the man's pockets until he found what he was looking for. He triumphantly held up the earth scroll in his hand before rushing past the concerned Gaara to where Tayuya now lay motionless on the ground. She had stopped convulsing, and Naruto didn't know if that was good or bad. She was still breathing. At least that was good, although it was labored and painful to just look at. Now out of his slightly crazed state of worry, he took the time to carefully lift Tayuya into a bridle position so as to not aggravate her condition. He took off quickly in the direction of the tower, but this time at a pace that Gaara could match. The fate of the Konoha team, or Kabuto's team, was completely out of his mind now. All he cared about was getting Tayuya somewhere she could be helped. At their pace, they reached the tower in just under an hour. Every animal that approached them was viciously and mercilessly smacked back by a wall of sand. This brought their total time to 1 hour and 21 minutes. Not that Naruto would even remotely care that they just smashed the previous records by over 4 hours. He crashed through the doors into the plain stone room, paying no attention to the large plaque hanging on the far wall. Frantically, he looked around for anyone to come to their aid. However, there wasn't a soul inside. He looked at the two scrolls. The damn things nearly cost her life. He angrily threw them to the ground. By some miracle, the two long pieces of paper unraveled and crossed over one another. The two half seals completed each other. Naruto coughed from the mass of smoke that suddenly poofed into existence in front of him. When it dissipated, he noticed a smiling Jonin standing in the middle of the seal, or at least he thought the man was smiling. The mask made it rather difficult to tell. All he had to go on was the closed eye curved upwards into a crescent, and the slight creasing of the mask around his mouth. However, the smile dropped when Kakashi noticed the condition of the redhead held in Naruto's arms. He immediately rushed over, relieving Naruto of his obligation as he took the girl from his arms and laid her out on a bed in the corner of the room. Naruto didn't realize just how tired he was from that fight and the sprint to the tower until he felt Tayuya's body leave his arms. He may have had buckets loads of stamina, but that didn't stop his body from feeling exhaustion when it happened. Using Kyuubi's chakra, despite having her permission, was still taxing on his body. His coils were still unused to the foreign chakra. He did manage to stay awake, though, long enough to see Kakashi begin to draw out complicated patterns around the strange mark on Tayuya's shoulder. Past that, Naruto couldn't remember as he felt his eyelids become heavier and heavier. His legs felt like lead, and soon his body followed as he dropped to the ground like a stone. Gaara paced the small room, his neutral face belying his concern for the two teenagers laid out on adjacent beds. He had been at this actively ever since. He'd been actively ever since Kakashi had finished sealing the curse mark. Now, aside from the three spiraling tammo on her neck, Tayuya had the makings of an intricate tribal tattoo. The strange and complicated circular seal would have wound around the original mark, occasionally spiking out at 6 points. Gaara hated looking at it. To him, it was a reminder of how he had lost his focus, and his friend had paid the price. With a sigh, he looked across at Naruto. He knew the blonde too well, and no matter how bad Gaara felt, he knew that Naruto would feel much worse. It was almost as if Naruto had taken on personal responsibility for Tayuya. When he saw and understood what the bastard snake had done to her, he would feel guilty, followed by anger. Gaara had asked Kakashi what he was doing at the time, but he ignored the sand wielder. He required utmost concentration when performing the complex seal, and had thought it better to tell them all when the others had woken up. This left Gaara in his current position, walking up and down the length of the small room until one of them awoke. At this rate, he feared he was going to wear a trench into the floor, and if he grew impatient enough, he might just do that to take out some of his frustrations. Luckily, he was saved from lashing out with his chakra-infused sand. As he heard the sound he had been waiting for, Naruto groaned while rubbing his eyes as he sat up from the hard, uncomfortable bed that had been provided. His first thought had been how strange it was to not wake up greeted by a curtain of red hair. The only time he and Tayuya wouldn't sleep together were on missions, when they would have to take turns in the rotation of guard duty. Of course, these thoughts of Tayuya immediately reminded him of the events before he passed out, and his head frantically snapped around to search the small room. He sighed in relief when he spotted the girl in the bed beside him, and saw Gaara walking over. Slightly concerned etched on his features as he made his own examination of his friend. "How do you feel?" Naruto looked at him, smiling at the concern his friend so rarely showed. "Fine, just a little sore." Gaara nodded. While it was uncommon due to their large chakra capacities, they both had felt the aching effects of chakra exhaustion before. It was like somebody removing all of your blood, only to reintroduce it very slowly. Naruto turned his attention back towards the person he was actually worried about. "How's Tayuya? Did we make it back in time? What about the mark? Is she going to be okay?" Gaara took a moment to process the rush of questions and allowed the blonde to calm down before answering. "Tayuya is fine, merely unconscious. We made it in time for one of the leaf jonin to perform some kind of counterseal on the mark. I do not know the specifics of what he did, but expect that when Tayuya wakes up, we will be informed. As for your last question," He took a look at his teammate/friend that lay peacefully on the worn gray sheets of the bed. "I do not know. I think I can help with that." The two genin spun around at the unexpected voice. Naruto cursed himself. He had been so focused on Tayuya, he had completely ignored everything else. Now that he was more alert, he could clearly smell the presence of the jonin that had just shunshined into the room. "You!" Naruto pointed an accusatory finger at the silver-haired jonin, who gained an amused expression before pointing to himself. "Me!" He said it with his strange eye smile that Naruto still couldn't quite work out. It made him curious about what was under the mask. Of course, he shrugged off the thoughts as he had more important and pressing matters to attend to. "Tayuya." That was about as coherent a sentence as Naruto could manage at that moment. Nevertheless, Kakashi understood the sentiment. One would be crazy to say that Kakashi didn't understand concern for a teammate. Crazy and masochistic. "Your friend will be fine, Naruto. Calm down." Naruto did as the older shinobi asked, taking deep, relaxing breaths until he felt he could actually speak properly. His mind completely skipped over the fact that Kakashi somehow knew his name despite the fact he never talked to the man. "What's going to happen to her?" Kakashi looked thoughtfully for a moment, or at least Naruto thought he did. The mask once again made it difficult to tell. "I think it would be better to tell all of you once she wakes up. Don't worry though, that should be any time." "Why the hell is my head on fucking fire?" They all turned to stare shocked at Taiya, who was now sat up, rubbing her shoulders right where the mask was. "Did that old bitch Chayo convince me to drink sake again?" Naruto sighed, relieved, although he was slightly concerned that Taiya seemed to think she was still in the Sand Village. She shook her head and blinked a few times to allow the slight haze that was clouding her mind lift. She stared curiously around the room, looking at the faces of the three ninjas staring at her in turn. What you fuckers looking at?" Then it all hit her, the encounter in the forest, Orochimaru jumping in front of the Uchiha kid when the snaky prick was about to attack them. Waking up here, she furrowed her brow, tried to remember how she got here, but all she got was fleeting images of a forest rushing by below her and the burning in her neck. She absentmindedly rubbed the spot, noticing the slightly silky feel of her skin in that area while turning to Naruto. "Oi, shithead, what's going on?" Naruto just smiled broadly, glad to see that he hadn't changed at all, and despite everything that had happened, just as he opened his mouth to answer, Kakashi cut in. "I think it's best if I explain it." Naruto turned to him, looking like he still wanted to say something, but he reconsidered and closed his mouth. "While you two were unconscious, we found out about Orochimaru's infiltrating the exams. It would appear he placed what's known as a curse mark on your friend Taiya here, and I..." Wait, hold up there, Cyclops. What the fuck did you say?" Kakashi sighed, not so much because of his nickname he had received worse, but because he had hoped to skirt around the subject. "A curse mark. It is a type of winjutsu that we believe Orochimaru developed to enhance his subordinates." He looked at Toyoya's face and realized that she wasn't fully satisfied by the answer. If you want the full explanation, ask Uncle." She looked at him curiously, as did Naruto, both wondering what the eccentric proctor of the second exam had to do with this. "Anyway, like I was saying," he shot a look at Taiya, but she remained wholly unrepentant, causing the Sharingan user to sigh again. "I managed to seal the mark before any damaging effects could take a hold." Taiya shot her head up, her hand immediately moving to the mark on her neck. "What damaging effects?" Kakashi gave her an eye smile, something that wasn't exactly comforting given the situation. "Like I said, there's nothing to worry about as long as you don't use the seal again." Taiya ran at him angrily. "I thought you said you sealed the fucking thing." Kakashi dropped the smile, shocking the three Genins slightly with how serious he became. "Not exactly. The seal I gave you merely neutralizes the corrupting aspect of the mark. The power and effect it has on you is still there. However, use of the mark will override the seal, allowing the mark its original corrupting capabilities back. The strength of the seal I placed is entirely reliant of your will not to use the mark. Should that will falter even momentarily, the mark will begin to take a hold of you more and more." By this point, both Taiya and Naruto were very pale. They couldn't tell if Gaara had a similar reaction, but he was always pale. "They get the fucking thing off of me," Kakashi sighed for the third time. "If it was that simple, we would have already done so. However, my knowledge of Winjutsu is limited. Even then, a sealing master would have difficulty without Orochimaru's original notes. The man was hailed as a genius of his time for many reasons, and his ability to outthink his enemies was one of them. Even Master Jiraiya, one of the Sannin, was unable to remove a cursed mark." Naruto, having listened through this whole conversation with growling dread and concern for his friend, finally found the will to speak. "You're wrong." Kakashi looked at him strangely, finding the outburst to be strangely familiar. "Toyo will get through this. We always do together." Naruto just stared at Kakashi with pure determination etched across his features before turning to face Toyo with all the care and comfort he could manage given the tense circumstances. "I promise, Toyo, I will help find a way to get that thing off of you." He stood up to his full height, giving Taiya his widest smile. "And you know me, I never go back on my promises." Everyone stared at the blonde with mixed feelings. Taiya outwardly looked irritated at the overly passionate display, whilst inside she was touched by his caring sentiment. Even after so long, her cold nature was so deeply ingrained that she still found it nigh unbelievable that there could be people who cared for her so selflessly. Kakashi looked at the boy, seeing the Minato in him shine through before turning his attention to the redhead. "Redhead, why didn't I see it before?" and there really is a lot of you in your son, Sensei. As touching as this moment is, you have other things to worry about right now. Naruto, fresh from his impassioned speech, turned to the man with a blank, confused look. The next round of the Chunin exams is about to begin upstairs. End of chapter 14.